Hi there, welcome to Frell's newest video. We'll be doing another one. This will be a podcast form video, so in case you can't see anything, this will be audio only. It'll be recorded on July 28, 2026 around 12:11 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to break down some of the things that I've been thinking, digesting, observing, analyzing over the few past months around 2026 when it first began. But I also want to leave a few remarks into this video, which you know how it would go, would be thrown all over the the duration of this entire podcast would be probably spread out very thin based on what's going on, because it's far too much to list. And every single day there's some new scandal that happens in the US government. So if I end up going back to the US government, that's because there's so much going on with the US government, if you understand what I mean. If you're somebody foreign, you're from Indonesia, I wish I could list down a few other things that are happening in Indonesia, but because this is a podcast, you can't see what I'm seeing. I'll be opening a few pages, going into the Gen Z protests and all these things that are going on in the world, because Roblox has also been in a really bad spot. But technically, the Gen Z protests are a series of youth-led protests and riots that have occurred in some parts of the world during the 2020s. So, of course, this is I'm looking at a Wikipedia page here, but it technically covers most of the protests that have been going on. The protests in Bangladesh in 2024 are widely cited as the first true Gen Z revolutions, inspiring other Gen Z-led protests, including Nepal, Indonesia, Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Maldives, and India, as well as some other parts of the world I can name. Of course, there's Peru, Italy, Cameroon, Bangladesh, Nepalese, Morocco, Malagasy, Bulgarian, Mongolian, East Timorese. We have France, Japan, Korea, United States, United Kingdom, European Union. The list goes on. But at the moment, there's a lot going on with the world. But I need to place it down for you, make structure of it, so that you all can digest this properly. So, number one, Gen Z. We're struggling. Okay. Absolute struggle. Gen Z is in a really bad spot. Absolutely decimated. Absolutely, like, if you want to say decimated, that's just too generous, right? People who have done their math and done research, like me, who know this is where this is going, around over 50% of Gen Z is likely to be rejected at most trade jobs that they will be taking or looking for when demand is so high up. Because of unemployment, you get high demand, meaning more competition, meaning more application floods. You see this everywhere. If you're an employee who still uses the internet, the older internet before the AI automation came in, you still look at these applications. You can't go through all of them, right? It's too many. You can't catch up. You don't have like 6 people, 10 people, 10 people, 10 people going through these application forms. And just about everybody who is Gen Z is most likely 90% plus rejected from corporate jobs that might be upper range of pay. Like if you're a university student or college student who just finished with graduation as of around June, because most graduations occurred around June, and most graduates who are still starting life because they've been in college or university during this time. I'm 21 years old, so people who started university were around when I was 18, and most of you guys, a majority or a margin of you, went over to university, college. You went through it, went through hell, went out, and came with debt. Debt is really high up for Gen Z. Gen Z has, based on my math, has the highest debt rates you'll ever see compared to every other generation behind them, right? The first generation to feel the sting was the millennials. So let me not be out of touch. I know the millennials had it hard too. We should put them in the same group as Gen Z, okay? It's unfair to eject the millennials out of this equation. Gen Z, as a genre brief, is one of the most rebellious, most protest innate generations you'll ever see. And the most smart generation, probably not. Why? So the margin ratio of people who successfully are able to practice the intelligence that they learned from university to college is very low. Because if they can't even get a job in the first place, that margin is very shrinked. It's often very skewed due to all the factors coming in with the very defunding of most education bureaus that you see in most consumer protection bureaus that have been protecting us against discrimination for decades on end. Like the USAID, before I get into there, leaning into Gen Z on the basis of USAID, most Gen Z are dying. if you think about it, everybody who was born around the years before Gen Alpha came into being, those who are still alive now, who are dying from USAID's cuts, which are hundreds of thousands of people. Elon Musk, I'm talking to you. Lots of those people are Gen Z, so those are counted as Gen Z deaths, along with the deaths of Gen Z in protests that I've been watching periodically since the early 2020s, when some of the very first ones were occurring. One of the examples is Thailand, which is 2020-2021. It was human rights violations, political corruption scandals, distrust in the 2019 general election. There was a democratic and economic regression since the 2014 Thai coup d'etat. There was a coup d'etat that happened in Thailand where people tried to turn against the government. And there's also an expansion of royal prerogative and a whole bunch of things going on. There was a state of emergency, there were demands, constitutional amendments were being tested, the Constitutional Court was proposing reforms. Well, it was Gen Z proposing reforms, and there were major protests, and lots of them are end up like Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was around Aragalaya on 15th of March, 15th to 14th of November 2022. There was corruption, economic crisis, nepotism, unpopularity of the Rajapaksa family, and resignation of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, in exile of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and resignation of the second Gotabaya Rajapaksa cabinet. And we have many of these examples appearing. There's going to be a huge ass names, trust me. If you're not able to catch or pay attention, I'm sorry, my channel is not for toddlers, okay? My channel is for adults. If you're here for the revolution, join and sit down with me. This is gonna be extremely nerdy. Today, we're gonna be going through a lot of this. But lots of these protests have to do with economic crisis, which Gen Z's actually not prepared for. Gen Z, which being that they are the most turbulent generation compared to the hippies or during the Vietnam War era, comes the very discussion around war. And Gen Z is also one dragged into war. Not only are we being forced to try to go through a possible draft this December in the United States, lots of Gen Z's propagation into turbulent protests and very violent protests have to do with lots of negligence. Negligence is something really high up there from older people because older people really do not care. They don't care, okay? You have to be honest. If you're in your 50s, would you care about gun reform? No. Do you care about being shot in schools? Most likely no. If you're in your 50s, do you care about the labor market, the stock market? Do you care about that? No, you don't. You don't. You've been investing for decades. You never had to deal with social media's uprise. You never had to deal with COPPA. You're in your 50s. Why would you care? Why would you care about our grocery prices? Because you have your sons and your son's sons are paying for your groceries, right? You're on 50K a year, 20K a year, depending on where you were born as a 50-year-old around in the 70s and 60s, right? And if you're a boomer, you're around since like the 40s or 50s, your situation is different. You economically you have more houses than Gen Z will have. Gen Z will have low houses. There's no affordable houses. Affordable housing crisis, jumble that with war, jumble that with gun reform, jumble that, just put it as much as you think. Think about the worst things in humanity and place that on Gen Z and say, fix it. Fix it, Gen Z. Here's all my mistakes and issues and I'm gonna put on. And then I'm gonna proceed to call Gen Z lazy, entitled, very self-centered. That's what every generation said to the generation that came after. They remind you, boomers were the ones who were saying Gen X was the lazy generation. We're repeating that same mistake. Difference is, Gen Z has social media. Gen Z is the most connected generation possible. Yes, we've lived with social media. Some of us grew up with social media. Some of us came in the later stages of social media. I was there since the beginning stages of social media. I was around there after the Wild West of the social media died out. We became fully corporate, right? We had monetized platforms. We had social media like not seen before. We invented the concept of gaming that you can competitively do. League of Legends tested this theory back in 2011, 2012. I did my research on that. 2009, we had our first streaming platform called Spotify, though Streaming is what they do. They're an advertisement company. Spotify, don't confuse it, is not a music company. They are an advertising company. They're there to advertise songs. They were the first. We had our iPhone in 2007, the iMac, the iPod. We went through evolutions of technology by then, which 50-year-olds could not give a care about. And I was there since they came out, literally. I was born in 2005, so I was able to see people use that technology 4 years in, 5 years in after they invented it. And I often notice people who are older than me own this technology, and lots of social media presence was based on a bunch of idiots on the internet who are just, quite tame. But extremism has been around for decades, okay? Not out of touch. There was no such thing as violent gangs, right? There was no violent gangs. There was no any of that on social media. The world was considerably still very, very new to the internet. They weren't exactly there. We had our gore sites. I can't say this on my channel. I'm 18. I'm already 21. I can say this. There were gore sites out there. There were shocker sites. We had our first internet memes, appear every so minute. Smosh became living legends. We had PewDiePie in 2012, Markiplier, Jacksepticeye. You get the entire idea. You get Roblox YouTubers in 2013, 2014. Think Noodles. The list goes on at TDM. And I was there when they began, so I just know about how it went. And Hasten that I think is probably some of the very last signs of the internet showing transformation like not seen before, because Gen Z happened to be the most turbulent generation. So a turbulent generation is not made from calamity and silence. We are made out of chaos. We are the result of chaotic internet. Before the internet became extremely surveilled, censored, you know what I mean. 2024, the age verification stuff, the global censorship war. But before all that stuff came in, you could literally post whatever you wanted on the internet. And as I grew up learning how people did this, I had a big idea of what people wanted to be. A lot of people wanted to be the next John Cena, and a lot of the people wanted to be the next president of the United States. People were glamorizing these subjects, and sometimes political stuff came in, slipped into the people's emails, mails, games, gameplays, their products. We never had loot boxes exactly just yet, but loot boxes were a thing for quite a while. Don't get me wrong. But when they became standardized in games, the fear of missing out, FOMO, all of those came from evolution, came from people experimenting with how far you can take something. Back in the day, we used to call electronic music slop. It's a real thing. When Spotify was releasing its music, all you heard was punk. Punk, music, hip-hop, Lady Gaga, you heard Kanye West, you heard all of those huge names. I could go on forever about those names, but my channel isn't here to promote mainstream artists who happen to be supporting Israel and supporting Ku Klux Klan ideologies that are not welcome or invited on this channel. So, I grew up in the indie space. Gen Z was possibly the most diverse at this. Forget about the millennials. The millennials started stuff. The millennials got to use the internet in its very early days, like the 90s or 2000s, right? 90s, 2000s. So most of you guys, millennials, got to see the internet since like when it was just chat rooms, logs, simple image forums, stuff like that. The very first platform that started to have imagery posted, like artwork that counts as artwork, like an art page, was Damburu, DeviantArt, Pixiv. Some of them came a little later, but those two specifically. Rule 34, that came later. That's like 2010s. Nowhere near, but certainly around at that edge. And we had pirating sites. Pirating sites were a thing. Don't get me wrong, there's also pirating sites. I want to name them, but I can't. For legal reasons, I can't lead people to very fishy sites. So just think about every pirating site that you have behind your head and think that I said it in the video so you can get an idea. But yeah, pirating sites, social media sites, Musical.ly, MySpace, Vimeo, Dailymotion, BandLab, Facebook, YouTube, old YouTube, by the way, old YouTube. There was never really any famous person having their own website from social media. Social media celebrities weren't a thing until like the late 2010s, early 2010s. If you don't count Smosh, you could say the first internet celebrity was Smosh, the one that basically set the standings, like the standing stool towards where social media would go. This is where I noticed all the patterns change. Throughout most of that, Gen Z happened to learn the mistakes of previous generations. Because when things got very digitized, like the Wayback Machine has to be some of the most consequentially important historical events in human history. When the Wayback Machine was invented, when Wikipedia was invented, we were able to store things of the past in ways you've never seen before. And so, if you're somebody like me who knows where this goes, what happens when you have past history recorded on the internet for free for you to see? Well, older people will get pissed. The immediate Gen Z knows what they did. When the internet came to be and became this huge Wild West, it was Wild West, it's still, let's say, early 2000s, because the 90s, that's like vaporwave, that's like cybercore, cyberculture. That's a whole different discussion for another day. But Gen Z happened to be falling upon these forums and going, why this happened in the 1980s? And if you're somebody who never used the internet, most boomers didn't know or care about the internet until like the 2020s. To be honest, since KOSA's, let's say, introduction since 2013, SOPA, KOSA, whatever you want to say. Since its very early introductions around the 2010s, like along with Kappa. By the way, Kappa was 2000s. The Napster case was in the 2000s. Napster versus, you know who, RIAA. The RIAA was very consequential too in history, but that's like internet media stuff. But Gen Z happened to discover the past history and mistakes of their previous generations. And you would wonder, what would Gen Z do when a bunch of kids who discovered the internet around the 2000s and 2010s were to go, we went to war in the 1970s? Why are we going to war? Wait, what's this war? Why are the Koreans fighting each other? What about this president? Why is Donald Trump racist? Why is Joe Obama so criticized? Why is this? And because the internet was still browser, Google was around 1997. If you didn't know, Google was invented around 1990s, late 1990s. This is before the dot-com bubble. So Gen Z was after that. Gen Z was around, I say, most of you came in around when the housing crash came in. So lots of internet users appeared around 2007, 2008, if I'm correct by my research. Lots of these users exploded. They found all of our past mistakes. They discovered other countries. If you're somebody who lived like reclusive into your family and you're isolated, your family never let you go outside most of the time, maybe you always went outside but you never knew there was another world, right? Lots of flat earthers that were flat earthers by then got ridiculed when the internet came in. When the internet came in, some of the earliest things you saw the internet goers like Gen Z and millennials do was start to mock the most dumbass people you can find on the internet, right? Because then when stupid people with extreme ideologies came into the internet and they started posting their bullshit, Gen Z caught on to this and noticed, why is my 40-year-old grandpa being such a dumbass? Why is he saying the earth is flat? I can see what he's typing. So when Gen Z finally had the ability to basically see what other people are posting, what they thought, what they believed in, you could notice the world shift from like, we don't care about the internet, to then going like, the internet matters a lot. When the world suddenly, because then the world during the very early industry epic era that you could find on the internet, you can do the research for this. Lots of social media, most war politics and most acts, legislation you see passed through Congress, House Committee, lots of that stuff wasn't usually interfered with by the early generation, the internet, because the internet only had, let's say, hundreds of thousands of users. It was only increasing by then. By the time we hit 2007, we can notice this traffic flow get bigger. We had demand for servers, we had demand for online digital stores, Amazon. As much as I hate Amazon, the company itself, which is now soulless and greedy, Amazon actually had a get-go from the beginning, and Jeff Bezos had something going. But, you know, when Gen Z found out this data, we started to get into the business of people who never thought that at one point a guy all the way from Haiti will be saying, why the fuck are you passing this legislation? Sending it through a chat room in 2008 saying, I heard you're this guy called US Representative John Macy or whatever, right? And there's some guy from Haiti, and you're like, who are you? How did you get my email? And the guy says, bro, it's the internet, it's the bomb. It's the bomb, bro. So that's how people used to speak back then, but you know, you can get what I mean. The internet coming in suddenly made the government go, oh shoot. The internet, when it gets bigger and bigger, more accessible, more affordable, will then threaten their legislation. It would threaten all the political systems. They would have to make new laws. We had that with Napster and RIAA, which is a legal battle over whether music being pirated was illegal or not. And they determined it to be illegal. Napster, you know, collapsed. We then had pirating sites become a thing. Pirate Bay came into existence. And sites that I shouldn't tell you about came into existence because YouTube's rules. I can't say the sites, but that came into place. So government suddenly realized that with the internet moving so fast, they had to find certain ways to regulate the internet. That Gen Z, if you remember, Gen Z was the experiment. In an era of AI, constant lobbying, authoritarianism, and really awful, horrible things going on with Gen Z, getting dragged into wars, getting dragged into political fights, having their games be touched, media being touched. Gen Z for a very long time has always been a part of the experiment. They've been experimented on by government when they invented brand new legislation. Because when Gen Z came into place, millennials had their spot. We were the most reactionary of all the generations because we knew what the government was doing. Because of the internet, news media had to quickly incorporate social media into their business, forcing them to have to broadcast things not just on the TV only, but also broadcast it on the internet as VODs. Which is why the Wayback Machine is possibly some of the greatest things that the internet has ever had to offer. So when this happened, Gen Z, every time the government did something, Gen Z would record it, talk about it, analyze it, observe it, make sites, make trends, memes, videos. We would make fun of dumbasses. We would expose people. We would support people. You could see it. It was real. It was law. It existed. And so when the government realized that this was going to be an issue, what if somebody did a scandal? So with Gen Z being that they knows how everything goes now, the government had to be legally forced to post every law that they wanted to pass. So when Gen Z suddenly found out that you could just like find all this information on the internet on a database somewhere, suddenly it went from like we have to be careful about what we post to now we have to make sure we arrest people for what they say. And you just know where this is going. When government started to do things on the behalf of Gen Z and started realizing that if they don't move faster, they would probably lose their shot at governing the way that they want. When everything was seemingly perceptible on the internet for free access, people started making research insights and started inventing brand new things like sites with different endings to them, with different protocols that lead people to different areas. We had malware being invented, another form of stealing from people, scams, Nigerian prince scams, dating scams. We had chatbot scams, we had romance scams. All of those things were invented from the internet as basically a factor that came in with people doing crazy things. And I was there. I was there since most of those concepts became to be reality. They said, instead of scamming somebody in person, or scamming somebody throughout the phone, or doing weird drug activities behind the scenes, what if you just do it on the internet? Tor became invented. The dark net came to be in existence. FBI had to suddenly go from like, oh shoot, we now have to watch for criminals on the internet as well. And because the internet was so lowly regulated, basically all the forms of crimes that you can hear about, some of the most disgusting crimes happened in the 2000s and 2010s. I was there, duh. I saw those. I saw the horrific sites. I saw the darknet sites. I saw the inappropriate sites. I saw whatever anybody would have seen if you were just there since 2012, 2014. And when you looked at the internet back in there earlier, you would know where this is going. And me being that I was Gen Z and millennials were there since like the very starts and beginnings of this stuff, I retained the knowledge that at some point government was going to put regulations that was really suppressive. I said, what if one day the government said, you can't say this, or we'll arrest you. We'll arrest you if you say this on the internet. It's inappropriate. We think you're spying on us. So the internet suddenly started having more rules. Most old people or people in their 30s, most of my parents or cousins' parents, most of the times didn't think the internet would be so effective. Actually, it is. You are out of touch. It simply is. You don't think it is possible. It is, because as a matter of fact, the privacy protests back around 2009 to 2012 for internet privacy and freedom, those were done by Gen Z and millennials. Millennials and Gen Z members protested this. Even people who were around Gen X, who were using the internet back then in their 20s when they came out of college or university, found it to be that they hate the government watching everything they are doing. Just like how we hated the British spying on us and taxing us without representation as the United States country itself, we don't like the government spying on everything we do. This is a long going thing about the internet, is that we don't want the government watching what we're doing. We absolutely hate that aspect. We don't want the government searching our messages without permission. We don't want FBI agents stalking their girlfriends and kidnapping them off the street because they were cheating. Alright? The truth has to be revealed in a way where the government isn't obfuscating your reality, altering the way you grow up and live. Because when government started to, like say US government started to lean into the internet, lots of you older people who I hope you know who I'm talking to, the people who are the parents of cousins of mine or parents of me, once thought the internet wasn't going to be that bad. That stay away from it, don't use your device. Too bad. Gen Z, millennials, by the time it already occurred, it was too late. Countries adopted the internet, hundreds of millions of people bought computers, TV stations became less relevant. We had to up the competition. The competition for animation had to go up. Kids shows had to go up. They had to be signing more money for budget. They had to make regulations for TV. They invented indie animations. Some of the very first indie animations started to appear. We had sites where you were able to host animations because people were inspired by Disney. So Gen Z started to do what previous generations couldn't do earlier, is make something and publish it on the internet. That's called content creation. Boom. Content creation. And when you got money for it, which previous generations couldn't do, back in an era where you were able to just make something and sell it for money on the internet, you couldn't do that. You had to go to a person. You could say, here's my food. Pay me $15 for the dish. Here's the cast. Here's the full tray of it. Pay me $43 for all of this. But with the internet, you could just go, here it is. Here's my artwork. Post it. 3,000 people see it. The impression. When the impression came to be a thing, impressions were extremely essential to what made Gen Z the way it was. Because when the internet began to have an algorithm for the first time around the late 2000s, we suddenly realized that not only was that the government was starting to become out of touch, the government wanted to censor everything. It was really hesitant because then it feared that if Gen Z were to organize all the way, it would fear that Gen Z millennials would work together to overthrow the government, which is why the government was so keen on spying on its citizens, which then led to Snowden, and a CIA operative exposing the government for torturing people, and also Snowden for exposing the NRA for spying on the people, NSA, by my bad, NSA, and all these other places, foundations. We had Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Donald Trump, all these horrid people that came into existence who were already famous by then. We had ChatGPT, Sam Altman by then. He was still doing things. Just don't forget that. There were a lot of the people you just know now were corrupt since the beginning. They always were horrible people. They then looked at the internet and saw an opportunity and said, what if we scam people on the internet? Let's sell, make a business, and make this thing happen. And so that's when we had this thing called the nuisance. The nuisance and shitification. The Wild West suddenly became no longer the Wild West, and suddenly the internet subsided from the divergence of many users where communities used to be smaller. And remember that when the internet was a lot younger back then, we had less users. Less users means less circles to be formed, less splitting. There's no real found algorithms, and whatever you saw was what you saw. You always had something new coming up, and some of the earliest people who were to adopt and make new accounts to make content creation on the internet, those were the first ones who were able to stand on trail and make something out of the future that was yet to come very soon, around late 2010s or early 2010s. Some examples of those types of people who basically prioritized being the first to something was Terror Bright Games, who was some of the very first early YouTubers to basically make content online, along with Smosh, Hank Green, and Markiplier, and you could say Nigahiga, PewDiePie, Mr. Beast. Obviously, there's a lot of legends out there, popular MMOs. There's a lot of people, Ninja. You could say it goes on for a while. I can go all day with that, but when it no longer became the Wild West, the internet stopped being individualized groups and keep that to yourself. Never was a thing. Gatekeeping, very small. If you had 10,000 followers on the internet back then, you would be seen as famous. Now these days, because there's so many bots, AI, and people, having 10,000 followers is like, you're a small creator. But back then, my day, 10,000 followers was like, you hit the milestone. You're rich and famous. That's what it was like. And if you hit 1 million, you were absurd. You were like legendary status. Now people can get 1 million subscribers by being a stupid idiot on the internet and being absolutely out of touch. Before we get to that stage, remember, people used to shame people for doing crimes on the internet because back in the day, we had really no reason. We really had no reason to like accept people who were stupid. To explain it, Gen Z, we used to shame people who were doing stupid things. Racism was joked about, right? We had dark jokes, we had edgy humor. That was a thing for many years. That was a thing for decades. Don't get me wrong. But we used to shame people for actually being those edgy jokes we joke about. So, if you're me, and you know what I'm referencing, misogyny, racism, discrimination, Nazism, accelerationism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, autocracy, oligarchy, you name it. Some of the very worst parts of humanity was rejected. It was joked about, saying, wow, look at this Nazi weirdo on the internet, haha, hee hee. We used to genuinely show people that we genuinely dislike these things. Even if it was very timid, We have full blown out neo-Nazism in the market, making people millionaires and getting people like Andrew Tate, who is a rapist, pedophile, become multi-millionaires out of. So the market's very different now. But back then we used to shame people and go, "You're so weird. Why are you doing this?" When people got rude back then, we used to call out their bullshit, right? We used to call it out, but not the way that you think. Back then, we used to say something like, "You're being rude. It's really insensitive. You shouldn't say that. That's not acceptable. You should. I will tell your parents." Right? There's not too many people, so when somebody said that, you would feel bad, right? You'd feel bad. You'd feel like, "I'm sorry. I apologize." That didn't last for too long, because then it kept getting worse. Because we used to be able to do that, like. We used to have YouTubers out there genuinely apologize to people for being somebody rude. Now people are like, being a pedophile is great. They're saying racism is cool. They're saying, "Oh, it's just an edgy joke. All I did was talk about Muslims being assassinated and being beheaded. All I said was to remove Mexicans outside the country because they're Mexican trash." So now people like that exist because we don't shame it anymore, which is a shame because we used to shame people for saying that stuff. We used to joke about racism and say being racist is so cringe. Now being racist is so profitable. In a world where facts are considered form of harassment, you just see where I'm coming from. So the market was very different. I lived a life around with indies. Indies were like, get into indies. Gen Z indies, I think, are the most unique out of the things that came out. Besides millennials, lots of millennials. Some of the artists I listen to or creators I know were millennials, don't get me wrong. And some of them are Gen Z. A lot of Gen Z. And they produce some of the most beautiful things I've ever listened to or digested my entire life. I think my life was changed by indies. I have indie blood, indie creator blood, indie artist blood. I will continue to keep saying this. Proudly, I lived with people who were poor. I listened to the music of poor indies. I listened to the music of people who sung in their closets. I listened to the music of people who were disabled. And the people who couldn't speak my own language. I listened to all those songs. I listen to them. I do. That's how I learned to not disrespect people the way you often see people disrespect people. Because nowadays, what counts as disrespectful is being smart. If you're smart and you use facts, people say you're disrespectful. Back in the day, we used to think that's attractive. We used to say, "Wow, that's so hot. That's so crazy. You're so cool. You know so much." Like, sometimes people would say, "Oh, he's a nerd." Actually, the nerd thing, okay? That was a thing for years. Don't get me wrong. We used to bully nerds and otakus back in the day. That's a whole discussion for another day. But Gen Z, just side tangent, Gen Z loves anime. Just so you know, hi demand. But going back to this, yeah, so that changed very quickly, subsided. You could say that the government and lots of dumbasses had something to do with how dumbasses became to be, because when Donald Trump came to be in presidency, we had the Logan Paul brothers, the Paul brothers come into existence, and they were some of the most awful, most arrogant, most annoying people you could see. Which then produced the song "It's Everyday Bro," the one you all know of, right? If you're still that far deep into the internet lore. I was around in those eras, so I just know about where this goes. So, a lot of philosophy. Philosophy is a whole big subject, but Gen Z is probably some of the most least religious generations you've ever seen. Gen Z is not really religious. Very little. You could say, but everybody around me is religious. That's a portion. That's like a tiny fraction of Gen Z. And probably most of those people are not Gen Z at all. Because millennials are more religious than Gen Z. And millennials are less religious than the generation that came before. Gen Z is some of the least religious generations you've ever seen. We haven't even gotten to Gen Alpha, and Gen Alpha lived with the internet. They don't know about Jesus. How would they know about the Hindu gods? Would they know Islam? Would they know something to do with Taoism? What about Taoism? They don't know what that is. All they know is social media. That's all they see. That's all they know. Which is why I'm fighting for Generation Alpha, but that's a whole discussion for another day. But Gen Z, yeah, basically was some of the very first two things. I've lived with indies who created things, and I think that was a beautiful thing. I think when music became more accessible and electronic music came to have its debut and people stopped ridiculing people for producing music with their computers, I think Gen Z went some very drastic directions when music software became more better and when art projects became, when, you know, back in the day, you didn't have some guy from social media go over and paint your hospital, and then, you know who, Zach came into place, and he came in and started drawing a hospital. You know, we went from, I'm not letting this weirdo paint my hospital, to, oh, I know who you are. You're that one artist guy from YouTube. You can paint my hospital. Back in the day, if somebody said, in the 90s said, I'm famous on social media, I want to paint your hospital for 20 million views, they will call you crazy. They will call you insane. They will call you a mental disease and say that you are out of your mind. In the 2010s, 2020s, if you said the same thing, they would say, oh really? Yeah, come right in. You can paint my hospital. Sure, paint my hospital for your viewers. Absolutely, I take it. Do you have any permits or forms? Have you ever talked with somebody on the phone before? They would tell you that. They wouldn't call you crazy. And now we have, but that led to is that we can go from wanting to draw a hospital for content, for a good cause, to then go outside being a chud, harassing people on the street for content, and breaking into restaurants and saying slurs and playing obnoxiously loud audios with a speaker like Johnny Somali. There's like two spectrums. I want to help cure cancer, to I want to be a disturbance and mess and ruin with people's lives. Like there's some two Gen Z can do that. You know, we can go from protesting about making sure racism isn't a thing, to then having full-blown racists who are young MAGAs who are in their 20s saying the most craziest things on the internet and not being banned or canceled for it, which is really scary, but that's a whole discussion for another day. But I would say Gen Z is definitely, on the employment side of things, suffering. Economy, suffering. War, suffering. About to be pulled into another war. Drafts this December, if the SAVE Act and all those other things go through, we'll be pulled into war. We had World War III, by the way, was very near because Ukraine just attacked the Saudi Aramco foundations over in Iran, in Saudi Arabia. Iran's also wanting to fight Ukraine, so China's wanting to defend Iran. And that's not looking good, because then the United States is super inclined to want to do something, because if we lose Iran, well, that leads to World War III, because in the United Kingdom, after trying not to fight the war, is now being dragged in to fight the war again, because then if we lose our oil gas market and it collapses again, and it already did, but it collapsed harder, we'll be dragged into World War III. And if we want to talk about reproduction, children, you want to have children, too expensive. So while Gen Z was focusing on trying to make reform happen, generations older than them by 2 generations decided to say, what if we just don't give a fuck and we just ruin Gen Z? Let's just make Gen Z suffer. And so they did. We lost Kamala Harris, and we basically lost the election, and we basically sucked ourselves, and we basically sucked their meatballs. So yeah, now we're kind of in a very pitiful situation where now Gen Z is likely to stay with their parents for more than 25 years. Because the economy crashed like 7 times, if you all didn't know. The economy crashed 7 times because we have gas inflation going up, housing prices, war, death, famine, heats, hurricanes, in the worst metrics possible. Global warming. Don't get me started with global warming. Education is going down. Funding for education is going down. Weather, health science, and environmental science and nuclear science is going down. Nuclear science is going up. If you didn't know, nuclear reactor building is going up. Somehow, what the Republicans are doing, what they think is bad, like nuclear reactor building, is actually a good thing. Weird. So, racism is going up, discrimination is going up, and they defunded all of our protections. Doge cut off USAID, there's mass death and genocide. We have a genocide over in Palestine, and we have genocide and massacres occurring in Gen Z revolts across the world. So, let me name out those protests. We had a Gen Z protest in Thailand, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, Iran Phase 1, Kenya, Bangladesh, Venezuela, Mozambique, South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, Mongolia, Togo, Malaysia, France, Nepal, Timor-Leste, Italy, San Marino, Ticino, part of Switzerland, Maldives, some people say Maldives, Madagascar, Morocco, Paraguay, Peru, Cameroon, Tanzania, some people say Tanzania, some people say Tanzania, Mexico, Bulgaria, Iran Phase 2, Uganda, India, Serbia, Georgia, Philippines, Japan, Albania. So that's a lot of Gen Z protests. And just counting the ones where the government was thrown out. Let's see, we have protest occurred successfully, cause references. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 governments were overthrown in the past less than a decade. So we had around a long amount of governments being overthrown in less than a decade. We are in the year 2026 and Gen Z has overthrown numerous governments already. And remind you, that's already past 1% of the world being overthrown. Major protests were... So for major protests, here's the number of major protests. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We have 14 major protests that occurred within less than a decade, adding the countries that were overthrown. You get that there's at least more than 1% of the world, at least, being in disarray because Gen Z is sick and fed up and tired with the government constantly throwing them under bus, because now we can finally get into censorship. Censorship has become extreme because you could say you're somebody rich and Gen Z is growing to be the most populated, most civilized part of society right now. We're kind of basically outnumbering a lot of the older people and rich people by a larger amount. Health and income, wealth inequality is very high. And you're somebody rich and you're like, I need to make sure Gen Z doesn't riot against us. Let's make sure Gen Z isn't even able to revolt against us. And then came into the global censorship war, World War III. We came into 7 economic collapses, Red vs. Blue number 3. Censorship came in on the mass. We had protests, Gen Z revolution came to be, health crisis, we had a pandemic, then we had epidemics. The United States is going back into recession again, another recession. It's like 3 recessions by now. And numerous countries had their riots, governments overthrown. Gen Z started to protest heavily. We took down websites. We DDoSed numerous government websites, the Epstein files. The list of absurdities that went on in the 2020s is to be numerous, because the year 2020 was shit. Like 2025, shit. Absolute shit. Like, this is ridiculous. So we did that, and we put as many effort as we can. So when they started to spend as much money to make sure Israel, by the way, I haven't even gotten to Israel yet. APAC is another enemy. Citizens United, Instacart, AI, the AI bubble. Good fucking grief. How much does Gen Z have to fix? It's as long as the names that are still in power. The names of people still in power who are still doing this is the enemies we have to defeat. Right? And in result of all of the things that are going on, that's very problematic. Horrible, horrific, terrorizing, very disgusting, awful, discriminating people. They went as hard as they could on Gen Z, and we basically broke records during this, because then Gen Z not only were sick and tired of this, we then broke records on ourselves. So many of the content creators who were born in these turbulent eras, who lived with the media just like how I did, came into power and took over roles and positions like never seen before. Mutinism, democratic socialism came into place and said, if they're going to do the absolute worst, we'll be doing the absolute best. And so to combat extreme, Gen Z decided to do something extreme back. Because most Gen Z was grown up. We were fed up, and we were like, let's, now that we're older and we're adults, Gen Z said, you know what, we're sick and tired of this. Let's do something different. And they decided to go against their governments in the millions of millions. And content creators who were building their platform, growing experience, making other creators flourish, that then helped other creators flourish, and this snowball effect happened. We're ready, and we were like, it's finally time. Let's change the world. And so Gen Z decided to start changing the world more directly. We entered politics, things got politicized, Gen Z members got arrested, we were spied on, we were assassinated, we were targeted, we were harassed as Gen Z, we were discriminated. They passed as many laws as possible to make sure we had a very miserable time fighting against the government. In most countries, realized, shit, Gen Z is rebelling against us. They're actually working to destroy us. The old tradition, to break reality, to challenge the current governments of the world. And then Gen Z was, obviously, they got prosecuted, we were arrested, we put numerous posts online, warning of corruption, we exposed awful and evil people, we had people arrested, we discovered them, we exposed them, we observed them, we broke down buildings, we lit things on fire, we broke down cars, we basically harassed evil people on the streets, we basically doxed the people on the streets who were passing all these racist, discriminatory, Nazi level legislation. We exposed court members, congressmen from different countries, we organized the protests, we overthrown governments, we took on the establishment like never ever seen before. And then came in Gen Z politicians, millennial politicians, who came into the equation and said, let's do the same exact thing. And so we went from lots of older people taking over Congress to then younger people running for Congress, and then people who were in Congress for decades suddenly actually felt fear for the first time and said, wait, what if they actually take us over? What if Gen Z takes away our chairs and our power? What if they make new laws that we've never seen before that might remove our power and our current stronghold on their existence? our lives. And so Gen Z started inventing things like never seen before. Here is a list of legislations that you must know of. I'll be naming these legislations, and I want you to later look into these in your own time. Gen Z started inventing things like never seen before. Because then government realized that from different countries, they realized we were fast. We didn't take 5 months to do things. We did it the very day we saw an issue. Gen Z then came and said, we don't need you. We don't need the past. We don't need your old tradition. We're sick and tired of that. And so we invented the Stop Killer Bots movement. Our Access to Banking Act, Indivisible.org, Fight Chat Control, Indie AI Lawsuit, Ice Block, Stop Killing Games, Rubio Act, Ethics and Energy Act, Nightshade, Glaze, Biz, the Media Act 2024, Corporate Crimes Against Healthcare Act, the Stop Wall Street Looting Act, Transparency and Frontier Agency Act, DataRequests.org, the Living Wage for Musicians Act, Generative AI Copyright Disclosure Act, QuickGPT, the Megalag Cookie Guard, the IRS Direct File, USAID needs to be reinstated, the Disclose Act, the Stop Illegal Campaign Coordination Act, Photon VPN. It goes on forever. There's a whole lot of list of other things that I've yet to even list, and this is just beginning because we still have lots left to cover. And we have enemies. Here are the enemies in the fight for the Gen Z revolution. Here are a few regulations, apps, laws, and systems and softwares that are against what Gen Z is inventing, that basically are meant to surveil and keep us in line, to keep their bottom lines fed, faking their statistics and rigging the stock market for themselves. Here are the things that evil people in this situation, in this storyline, made. They have the Genius Act, the Screen Act, Grok AI, EU Chat Control, EU Age Verification, Shadow Dragon, Kids Online Safety Act, SocialNet, Persona, Open Source Intelligence, COPPA 2.0, EU Chat Control 2.0, the Texas App Store Accountability Act, Foundry, Gotham, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, Citizen App, Mobile Fortify, Nexus, Clearview AI, RELX, the PRISM Program, Section 702 of the FISA Act, ICE 287G, Anti-Corruption of Public Morals Act, ACE Alliance for Creativity Entertainment, Make Health Great Again, Instacart, Paragon, Israeli Surveillance Spyware, by the way. It's Internet and Digital Safety Act, the Online Safety Act 2023. Clearview AI, but the system itself. Stop Online Predators Act, the Clarity Act. These are evil, by the way. They're meant to surveil you. Lots of these are basically, they're meant for fraud and crypto regulation, surveillance bill, social media surveillance bills. They are spyware, pricing schemes, medical scams, controversial government intelligence tools, universal sexual content ban, anti-piracy, data broker loopholes, surveillance software, military, corporate, corrupt surveillance, future surveillance, open source intelligence, bullshit, government surveillance scheme, enforcement scheme, censorship scheme. It's bullshit. The things I listed there, make sure everybody who runs for Congress is against these. With that, that'll be it. That'll be the Projecttian here. I've been going around for an hour trying to cram as much information as I can possible. And make sure to do your research. Remember that. Protest peacefully. I've been here for 8 years by now. This is obviously just a podcast, so what gives? And there are people that died throughout this fight. I want to name them, but I need to do more research on these people when time comes to be. And with that, don't do stupid things. This is not an excuse to go to anarchy. We are still a democracy if we make it to be a democracy. We live in an oligarchic society though, and we need to make sure we step out of this loophole of ending no end misery and slop and death. Okay, so I'll be continuing to watch on what things go on, and unfortunately I can't cram this in 1 hour, so I'll see you around. Make it iconic. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like to get this video anywhere else. As always, that'll be it.